in a conference room with a single signature that changes the world forever. For 75 years, the global order rested on one assumption, that when the world faced danger, America would be there. Not because it had to, but because the system was built that way. Alliances, markets, currencies, military power, everything revolved around one center of gravity. But in the last 72 hours, something happened that most people still don't fully understand. This wasn't a political stunt. This wasn't just another controversial headline. And this definitely wasn't a temporary shock. What happened was the quiet dismantling of an entire power structure. While the world was watching speeches and reacting emotionally, something else was unfolding behind the scenes, something far more permanent. Because when America walked away, Europe didn't panic. Europe moved on. And what they built in response may redefine global power for the next 50 years.
Something extraordinary just happened, and almost no one is understanding it correctly. And for the past few days, headlines have been screaming chaos. Commentators have been arguing. Markets have been swinging. Social media has been filled with outrage, celebration, and panic, depending on which side of the political divide you're on. Dan, but beneath the noise, beneath the emotional reactions and surface-level analysis, something far more important is unfolding. What just happened was not a diplomatic tantrum. It was not a negotiating tactic, and it was not a temporary disruption. Samdia, it was a structural shift in global power, and the people reacting emotionally right now, selling in fear, buying in excitement, are about to learn a very expensive lesson about how power actually moves in the modern world. Alien, because when history looks back at this moment, it won't remember the speeches, it won't remember the tweets, it will remember what happened after the announcement, when the markets opened, when governments acted, and when capital quietly changed direction. Belind, let's start with what everyone thinks they understand. Days ago, the president made an announcement that for 75 years, American foreign policy had treated as unthinkable, a move that every administration, Republican and Democrat alike, had avoided, not because it was impossible, but because the consequences were too large to control. Dombalia, the United States withdrew from NATO. The justification was familiar. Europe wasn't paying its fair share. America was carrying the burden. The alliance was outdated. It was time for America to stand alone. Banley on television, it sounded decisive, strong, defiant. But here's the part that was missed completely. Europe had already stopped believing in American reliability years ago, and that changes everything. Malene, I've watched enough market-shifting events to know that the first reaction is almost never the correct one. I've lived through currency crises, geopolitical shocks, trade wars, and policy disasters that were supposed to end the world according to headlines, only to watch smart money quietly reposition while everyone else panicked. The real story never appears immediately. It appears after the smoke clears, and Chishter are hours after this announcement. The picture coming into focus is not chaos. It's preparation to unbend. When markets opened after the withdrawal announcement, most analysts expected one thing: panic across Europe. Defense stocks collapsing, capital fleeing, investors assuming Europe had just lost its security umbrella overnight. That's what the White House was counting on. Then the European defense companies were supposed to blink. Governments were supposed to panic. Markets were supposed to force Europe back to the negotiating table. Instead, something very different happened. Menja European defense stocks dipped briefly 2, maybe 3%, and then recovered. By midday, some were flat. By the close, several were higher. That's not fear. That's not uncertainty. Blends. That's what it looks like when people already know what's coming. Blend. Because you don't see that kind of calm unless the plan was already in place. And that's when it became clear this story didn't begin with America's withdrawal. It began months, maybe years earlier, in rooms where American officials were no longer being taken seriously. What happened next confirms it. Blanja. While American media was still debating the political fallout, Europe made an announcement of its own. Not a proposal, not a summit, not a discussion, an announcement. A fully structured, fully financed, operational European Defense Union backed by $2 trillion, not spread over decades, not dependent on future votes, ready now, an integrated command structure, unified procurement, domestic supply chains, independent decision-making, and then came the detail that should have sent shock shockwaves through Washington. This new alliance wasn't just European Canada. Japan, South Korea, Australia, Norway, full partners, equal access, equal voting power, no United States. That's not symbolic. Yeah, that's strategic exclusion. And here's the part. Most people still don't understand, Kamalan. You cannot build something like this in 72 hours. You don't coordinate governments, militaries, budgets, and supply chains over a weekend. You don't raise $2 trillion without years of planning. You don't integrate command systems unless they've already been tested behind closed doors. Europe didn't react to America's decision. America triggered Europe's launch sequence. Down for years, European leaders wanted strategic independence, but NATO made that nearly impossible. Every major defense initiative required American approval, American systems, American standards. Europe wasn't subordinate by choice. It was constrained by architecture. The moment the United States walked away, that architecture collapsed and Europe moved immediately because they had already built the alternative. Jan, now let's talk about the real consequences, because this is where theory turns into money, power, and influence. Len, for 75 years, NATO guaranteed American defense companies access to European markets. Interoperability meant American systems were the default. American fighters, American missiles, American logistics. That pipeline is now broken. The European Defense Union does not require American compatibility. It requires European compatibility. That means European contracts go to European companies. Research funding stays in Europe. Supply chains consolidate inside the bloc, and this isn't a short-term shift. European defense spending is about to explode. About $2 trillion is only the beginning. Analysts already expect total spending to reach $4 to $5 trillion over the next decade. That entire growth cycle gone. A Bendian not lost to competition, lost to structure. American defense firms will still exist. They won't collapse. But their growth assumptions just died. And that matters because defense isn't just about weapons, it's about technology. Modern militaries run on AI, advanced materials, cybersecurity, semiconductors, and space systems. Defense budgets quietly subsidize civilian innovation. They always have. The internet didn't come from Silicon Valley first. GPS didn't. Microprocessors didn't. They came from defense research. Cut American firms out of European defense spending, and you don't just lose contracts, you lose innovation momentum. And Europe understands this. That's why the defense union isn't just military. It's technological, it's industrial, it's economic. And it brings us to the dollar. For decades, the dollar's dominance rested on three pillars: economic size, energy markets, and security leadership. One of those pillars just cracked. Defense procurement creates currency demand. When allies buy weapons, train forces, and integrate systems, they transact in dollars. Now Europe can transact in euros. Band partners can hold euro reserves. Contracts can be denominated locally. Security no longer requires dollar exposure. Manda, this doesn't collapse the dollar overnight, but it starts a slow erosion. And those shifts don't announce themselves loudly. They happen gradually, then suddenly matter all at once. 50 years from now, historians may look back and say this was the moment the post-war financial order began to truly unwind. Let's now look at the partner countries. This wasn't random. Canada brings critical minerals. Japan brings semiconductors and precision manufacturing. South Korea brings shipbuilding and missile tech. Australia brings resources and Indo-Pacific positioning. Norway brings Arctic expertise and energy. Eliminate every gap filled, no dependency on China, no leverage left for Washington. This alliance was engineered to be self-sufficient. And notice something else. Every one of these countries has questioned American reliability in recent years. Europe didn't recruit them. They were already looking for the exit. Now let's talk about bases. America operates dozens of military installations across Europe. These bases exist because of alliance agreements that no longer exist. No announcement has been made yet. None is needed. Once Europe controls its own defense, foreign bases become political liabilities. Lease renegotiations begin quietly. Costs rise. Public pressure builds. Best case, the United States pays more to stay. Worst case, access disappears, and those bases aren't just strategic assets, they're economic ecosystems. Contractors, workers, communities. Supply chains, this decision didn't just shift strategy, it put hundreds of thousands of jobs into long term uncertainty. Blend now, bring this back to investors because this is where reality hits portfolios. American defense stocks face long term repricing. Not panic, revaluation. Growth assumptions will be revised, guidance will change, multiples will compress. Blend European defense firms just became decade long growth stories. Currencies will shift, commodities will surge, supply chains will realign. And perhaps most importantly, the world is moving faster toward multipolarity than most people are prepared for. American dominance wasn't permanent. It was maintained through alliances, through reliability, through trust. And trust, once broken, doesn't return easily. This moment reveals something fundamental about power. Power isn't about size alone. It's about being indispensable. For decades, Europe needed America. That need created leverage, influence, leadership. Mained but leverage only works when the other side has no alternative. The moment alternatives exist, leverage disappears. And America didn't get challenged. It got replaced, not through hostility, not through conflict, through preparation. And that's the most dangerous part because replacement doesn't announce itself. It simply moves forward quietly, efficiently, and permanently. This isn't the end of American power, but it is the end of automatic dominance. The world is reorganizing, and it's doing so without waiting for permission. The question now isn't what America says next. Lenges. It's how America adapts to a world where it is no longer the only center of gravity. Bant, because history doesn't pause for nostalgia, it moves on. And in just 72 hours, the global order shifted in a way that will shape the next 50 years.